So this is general biology, Bio131, and this is chapter 7, and chapter 7 is about the evolution, Darwinian evolution. And we're going to cover part of these topics, not all of them. We are going to be selective. We'll do from 1 to 6, and then we're going to skip certain parts and continue after that for specific parts to be done. So the first thing that we need to know is, or to talk about, is the diversity of the organism. If you look at everything around you on Earth, you will see a lot of diversity, and there is a lot of unity as well. So there are a lot of things that are different, and a lot of other things that are in common between different things. Okay? So from the historical point of view, but still you need to know this, from the history, Darwin is a British naturalist, Charles Darwin. He published The Origin of a Species by means of natural selection. You need to know that this is what he participated, and this is a huge thing in regard to the evolution and the origin of a species. This is introduced the concept of evolution and natural selection. We will discuss the details, but you still need to know this piece of information about the history. Okay. Other things in the history that we also need to know is Aristotle. He thought it was wrong, but it's history. He thought that the young Earth have unrelated, unchanged species. Like each species, every one of these species is all by itself, and it doesn't change. Like what we have now is the same 5,000 years ago, is the same 500,000 years, 500 years ago, is the same thousands of years ago. It doesn't change, which are proven to be false. But it's history, so we still need to know it. How did they know that this is false? By the fossils. So they found fossils in the 1700s, and in these fossils they found the sequence of things like this chimpanzee, for example, and this monkey, and this and this and this. So they found out that it looks like it is evoluting, it is getting more advanced and more advanced. So when you see an older versions of things that existed hundreds or thousands of years ago, you know that this was not true, that it's not changing. It is changing, and it is evoluting. It was just a theory, an idea, but proven to be false. Another two scientists that you need to remember, Lamarque and Life. Lamarque is the one who said that species change over time. So he put this theory, which is introduced into evolution, which turned out to be true. Leo, on the other hand, said that the old Earth, which is not the young Earth, that's not changing as Aristotle said, but it gradually changes and it is accumulating. So it changes, micro changes, but adding year after year, after hundreds and thousands of years, the evolution come as an accumulative process. So Darwin spent years, when he was a young man, he spent years observing nature. He was not a classic student who's just attending school and stuff. He's just traveling around and observing a lot of things. And from his observation, and he traveled to a lot of different continents and different areas and countries, observing everything. So he started also to read, analyze, and look at specimens and discuss the ideas until he proposed the mechanism upon which the explanation of the natural selection started. Okay? So if you look at this, if you are observing, does the population tend to be stable in size?
True.
Do you know what's population in the first place?
Yes. Population of certain species.
what's the definition of population? A group, same species, that lives in the same spot, in the same area, same time, and they are related. Like you say, humans, this is a population. Elephants, this is a population, right? And so on. So does the population tend to be stable in size?
Yes.
Like the number of humans now is the same as 1,000 years ago, the number of elephants, the number of plants? Of course not. Some are getting more and some are getting less. So it's not stable, right? Are the resources limited or not? Or unlimited?
False. It's false. They're not unlimited.
It's not unlimited, it's limited, right? Like, are we going to run out of natural gas at certain day? We don't know what time, but are we going to run out of it? Of course. 100 years from now, I don't know. 500 years, maybe, right? You don't know. So ultimately, we are going to run out, or at least the stocks of different things is going to drop. Okay? Does the individuals in species are exactly alike?
False.
False. Everybody have something unique, right? Are the traits can be inherited? True.
By genes.
Exactly, by genes. So according to this theory, according to Darwin, the modern species, the species that we have right now on Earth, okay, they descended from common ancestor, which we call it evolution, according to him. Whether you believe in evolution or not, this is biology, and we're just studying and understanding it. Okay. So the first thing is they come from a common origin, and he said the very, very first one is the prokaryote. This is the simplest form, like bacteria is a prokaryote. Okay, and things come from that, and natural selection played the role, and we're going to discuss the natural selection in details. Okay, now the question is, how exactly did he come to this natural selection and evolution theory? It is an observation and conclusion. He observed something and come to a conclusion. Observe something else and come to a conclusion. So the first observation is that he noticed overproduction. More individuals are born that's exceeding the resources or not supported by the environment. So he noticed this. Like if you think about it, we have 100,000. If you just think about it logically, if each couple of those is going to give you like 3, 4, 5, it is going like a pyramid, and it's going to increase dramatically, right? And we said the resources are limited. So at certain time, when you go more and more and more, ultimately you're not supported by the environment. But this is just an observation. So it's an observation, but he found or he came to a conclusion depending or counting on this observation that he noticed. Like he asked himself, if it is increasing like this, how can we survive until now? Like it's increasing for thousands of years. Then what? How can we still survive? If the environment is not supporting us, how can we still survive? Not just humans, everything. This is the first observation. The second observation that's complementary to the first one is limited resources. The amount of resources like food, water, shelter, sunlight, and so on. This is relatively constant. It's not going to increase, right? Or if we can, it's not constant exactly, relatively constant, meaning that maybe we're producing more food right now, but the organisms on Earth are exceeding that, right? Some other things are not going to increase, like water. Water is not increasing, right? Like the rivers and the lakes that you have right now, maybe it's the same like thousands years ago, right? It might be the same. So this comparison between overproduction from one side, an observation, and another observation, which is a limited resources, it brought him to a conclusion. What is that conclusion? He said, since there is an overproduction and limited resources, so there should be a competition somehow, and some of this species are going to survive and others are going to die. Not all of them. If all of them are the same, think about it, we wouldn't even exist right now, because there will not be spot for us. There may be no spots, maybe no water, no food, but there is. How? Competition. So simply, not all individuals are going to survive and reproduce. Some individuals are going to survive and reproduce, and others are not. Whether they are not reproducing, they live their lives and then die, and that's it. No offsprings. Or they can actually die, right? If you compare to if you like look at animals, for example, animals, if animals have limited resources, what do you think will happen?
Okay.
Some of them will die, and the strong ones will survive. Isn't it the case?
Mm-hmm.
So some of them will survive, right? These are naturally selected to stay. So even though the resources are limited, the number is going to shrink according to these resources because of the competition. Sometimes they can even eat each other, right?
Yep.
We heard about this. So it is the competition. Not everybody can survive, and not everybody cannot reproduce. So this is the first two observations, followed by a conclusion. What's the first next observation? He notices variations. No two individuals are alike, not even two. There is no two humans that are exactly 100% the same, right? Even if you get identical twins, get the DNA, it will be different, right? They cannot be 100%. Even if you look at two animals, they look exactly like each other, they are not. Yes?
How do we know? Like, what if there's somebody exactly like me way back then, but they died?
From these fossils, they can search for the fossils. Of course, there's nothing that can tell exactly that, but at least they never found, through all these years, they never found anything that's similar. Even studying the fossils that's belong to thousands of years ago, they never found any two that are exactly typical. So these are theories, and it's proven.
Okay.
So this is the observation, and it came to the conclusion, which is the natural selection. So since we have variations, like not even two individuals that are exactly the same. So, and since you see this observation, what's the conclusion? He said, okay, since everybody's different, so everybody's having certain abilities, right? Certain traits. And some of those are going to be naturally selected to survive and reproduce, and others are going to die. And the good example of this, if you look at this, bacteria, for example, you see all of these bacteria are the same, right? And this one, the orange one, is different, whatever the reason is. And usually the reason is mutation. Like the way they produced antibiotics, they got one of these, let's say we're making antibiotics against Staphylococcus, one of the bacteria, okay? How can we do the antibiotics? Give me that Staphylococcus, get it into the lab, let's analyze how they live, how they get the nutrients and oxygen, and then, according to our understanding, we are going to make antibiotic that will interfere with their survival. Did we get the idea? This is how they make antibiotics. So they give people antibiotics and started to kill these bacteria. So far so good, right? So far it's okay. But this one bacteria, or 5 or whatever the number is not killed. Why? A mutation happened. So we make the antibiotics, it's tailored according to what we know, right? Assuming that all of them are the same, right? And I give you antibiotics depending on that, and actually it was working. Bacteria are being killed and everything. But this one, for some reason, have a genetic mutation. So let's say, just as an example, okay? We give antibiotic to this bacteria to destroy the wall, okay? This is the idea of this specific antibiotic. You get the antibiotic, it's going to break down the wall. For some reason, one of these bacteria got a genetic mutation and it make a double wall, for example. So you're destroying the first wall, they still have the second wall. What are you going to do now, right? You don't know what's happening there. So because of that, all these bacteria are killed, but this one survive, right? This one is going to be selected, it's going to reproduce, and the other one are going to be killed, right? So isn't that selected naturally? Naturally selected, right? Which one is selected? This one that have the mutation, because the mutation give them advantage in this case. So it is to them, not to us, of course. To the bacteria, this is an advantage, isn't it? It's an advantage. It's a mutation that leads to advantage. Some mutations are bad, but to them, this mutation was actually good, right? So they are going to survive. And if you follow it down here, you will see that these types are the ones that are going to reproduce, and they become resistant to antibiotics. Do we know that there are some antibiotics that stopped using it completely? There are some antibiotics they said, okay, we are going to just stop using this because huge amount of resistance. But did we understand where the resistance came from?
Yes.
Most likely it is something like this. It's a genetic mutation, favored some of these bacteria. It was an advantage to them. It was a good mutation, so they can resist, and then they started to reproduce, and then at certain time we might need to stop using that antibiotic completely. Are we okay so far? Mm-hmm. Next observation. Heritability or hereditary. Traits of an organism are usually, or most of the time, it's passed from generation to generation to generation. Example is these bacteria. When they reproduce, you would think that, right? You think that what's going to happen, it makes sense that they are going to inherit that same, like if they have double wall. I'm just giving examples. If they have double wall, the next generation will have a double wall, so it's going, the trait of double wall in this case, just as an example, is going to be passed from generation to generation to generation. So from that observation, that because of that inheritance that's going to happen, he concluded the evolution. He said, since this trait is being inherited from generation to generation to generation, so those who got this generation are going to evolve to a different type, and the other type is going to be reduced or completely eliminated. So isn't that evolution? Did you get a type of bacteria from a previous type of bacteria? So this type evolved from the older type, right? That type which is antibiotic resistant evolved from that original type that was antibiotic sensitive. Make sense? So you're making another thing, and you never know what's going to happen. How about this? Maybe you are making another antibiotic to this one specifically. So now you have to do double wall. Okay, I will make another antibiotic that can deal with the two walls. You're killing them, and you're successful now, until one of them get another mutation that's adding another thing on the surface, for example. Now you're evolving again, right? So you're evolving one after one after one, type after type after type, and this is going to be inherited. The trait is going to pass from generation to generation through reproduction, whatever the type of reproduction is. It can be sexual reproduction or asexual. In all cases, it's going to be inherited anyway. So they're going to evolve because they are inheriting this trait that is benefiting them or giving them an advantage, and they are become more suited to the environment. Is that clear so far? Is that clear? Okay. The point here that's important to understand or to know is that individuals do not evolve. The natural selection is not, we don't notice it in individual. Okay, it is, the natural selection is in population. We don't follow one person that's evolving to the next to the next. It doesn't go like this. We're watching the whole population. In our case here, we're watching the whole population of bacteria. Some of those are going to survive and the rest is going to die. So we usually, when we talk about evolution, we're talking about natural selection in that population. Okay? So natural selection even though it acts on individual, but what's evolving is a population, not one person is evolving. This population, like bacteria, antibiotic resistant bacteria, this whole population is evolving, right? The other thing that you need to notice is, if you're talking about a trait, we are talking specifically about the traits that can be inherited. Otherwise, it doesn't count. Example, yes?
Can you give examples of traits that can't be?
Yes. How about a bacteria that's changed and make a double wall just because of the environment, make that layer, extra layer because of the environment around it, but it's not a change in the gene. It's not a mutation in the gene. Something happened from the environment, for example.
Okay.
You have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Like, it seems like very similar to adaptation, because here it says evolution occurs only in response to local environment conditions, not future ones. And this happens to, like, let's say, like I read once, the wild dogs in Africa, because there was no more rain and there's no graze to feed on. The dogs need to run faster to catch the prey. So the coming generation, some of them died for sure because of the lack of a source of food.
Yeah.
While the coming generation became faster due to the adaptation that occurs, so they run faster, so they didn't catch it, they won't eat
yeah, you're talking about the evolution or
environment factor that affects the ability of the animal to evolve, to stronger, faster.
It is not exactly like that. It's not exactly. In that case, those who are fast were able to survive. Those who are slow are not able to survive. And those who are fast, they have the genes to make them fast, so they pass it to the next generation, which survive because they are fast. It's the other way around. And when they say it's not for future generation, it means like this. You're not changing because maybe later you will need something that's going not like this. Like the bacteria is not changing because maybe 100 years later they will make an antibiotic. It doesn't happen like this. It just happened right now.
But the introductions in itself, when they say the natural selection only occurs doesn't occur for individuals. So how?
Oh, it does happen to individuals, but no. The evolution happened to individuals. The natural selection is peer population. Okay, this antibiotic resistant evolved from antibiotic sensitive. Okay, so it does evolve, but we do not call that by itself in one person. We don't call it natural selection. Natural selection is this plus this plus this plus this. So we're talking about the whole population. So which part of that population was naturally selected? We call it peer population. Okay, so evolution happened for individuals, but natural selection happened for the whole population. Okay, if you put all of these together. Okay, so the evolution happened, which is the natural selection, because of what's happening now, not what you're predicting. And this is the next part. So evolution is not a goal. It's not happening for a goal. And again, the example of that is when this. Are we following? When this bacteria made another membrane, a double membrane, it didn't make it in purpose because you know that antibiotics are coming. No, it doesn't happen like this. It just happened that they somehow have a mutation that they have a double membrane for some reason, and then since the antibiotic came, they are not killed and they are naturally selected.
Is it possible for the organism to basically adapt and form mutation?
It can be both of them. Yes, it can happen both of them. But adaptation by itself, if it is not coded on the genes, we do not count it toward evolution and natural selection, because you have this advantage and you die and that's it.
Can the advantage be passed on
If it is coded on the genes, it will pass. If it is not coded in the genes, you will have the advantage, but it's not passing from generation to generation, so it doesn't count toward evolution.
So I have like so when an organism adaptate to something, okay, doesn't get coded to the gene. Like let's see, like African Americans, they have, Africans, they have big muscular bodies, big muscular bodies, because they live in environment that they need the muscularity and like big posture. But people that lives in the mountains, let's say in like the Middle East, you see them like thin, short, and that's their body. That's how their ancestor was. Because the family.
But remember, both of them are coming from this. Yeah, but both of them are coming from the same ancestor. Both in all of these on Earth, or humans on Earth, are coming from the same ancestor, right? So those who came to this part, those who suited, here is what's happening. They are adapted to this part, right? And those who are weak were not able to reproduce in this case, and those who are strong enough, they are able to reproduce and pass this. So ultimately, the whole population is going to evolve. This is according to that theory, okay? Whether we believe in that or not, but this is how it is explained, okay? So again, the point I'm trying to make here is, if this trait is coded on the genes and it can pass to the next generation, it counts toward evolution. If this isn't just an adaptation that's not passed, coded on the genes, it doesn't count. Okay? Yes?
What about, well, for example, see how like civilization evolved and all that? Like, and technology and everything like that? Now, like, for example, we're not suited for environments that we weren't suited for in the past. We could like survive with them now. Would that cause mutations?
Mutation doesn't happen because of an issue. The mutation happened randomly.
Yeah, I know. But I'm saying, for example, like I've heard that these people, I don't know where they're from, but they spend most of the time underwater, like swimming, and their mutation occurs where like most of the population has their eyes. They see underwater clearly, it won't hurt them, and they can hold their breath longer than.
Those who have, again, it's come from the other way around. Those who have a genetic mutation that enable them to survive, others will not survive. Those who have the genetic mutation were able to survive, and then they will pass it on to the next generation. This is how it goes, and not the other way around. It's not you acquire something and then you change the genes.
The weak will die and the strongest will survive.
Yes, so those who were able, because of the genetic mutation, they were able to survive, they're going to reproduce. Those who did not have a genetic mutation, they were not able to survive, they're going to die. You don't hear about them because they're dead. Those who have the genetic mutation that enable them to survive, they are going to continue. Okay? Okay. How does the evolution affect our daily lives? We talked about the natural selection, right? The natural selection is not something that we intended to do. It's just happened. And because of that, if that was a good mutation, they are naturally selected and they're going to reproduce. But there is something called artificial selection, not the natural selection. There is an artificial selection, and the example of that is this, the gray wolf. This is the ancestor for all these dogs. Some of these dogs are good enough that we can take them and they become domestic, okay? So, and those are going to survive. But this is not natural selection. It's not because they have good genes or something. It's because we choose to breed those. So this is considered an artificial selection. It's not a natural selection. Not because those have better genes that give them an advantage to survive. No. We humans chose those parts to breed, and that's why they were selected artificially to continue. And those that we did not adopt, maybe they couldn't find a shelter, food, and they're going to die. So this is called artificial selection. We choose to breed them. Okay? Antibiotics were discovered 1940, around the 1940 something, and some of these antibiotics were become useless because of the bacterial resistance that we talked about, and we gave an example like that before. This is before they make the antibiotics, so those types are okay because there is no issue. Even this, so this is a normal one, and this is one that have mutation. Both of them are okay until we make the antibiotics according to this known one, and we give the antibiotics. They kill the normal ones, but these are going to survive, and these are the ones that are going to continue and reproduce. The evolution obviously helped in adaptation, and they always call it is an accumulation of traits. An accumulation of traits means it doesn't have to be one trait only. Okay, I'll give you another example for this. Again, to the bacteria, if that is a clear example, if this type of bacteria become resistant to that antibiotic, this is one trait only, right? Double membrane. How about you make another antibiotic, just think about it, that can penetrate both membranes? Then they are going to change the cytoplasm from inside to be protecting for them. Okay, so what do we have now? I have two things. I have two different adaptation mechanisms. One of them is the double membrane, and the second one is the change in the cytoplasm. Even if you make another one, you are going to kill most of these bacteria, but you never know. Maybe one of them is going to have a mutation in the nucleus, and the nucleus is going to secrete something to stop the antibiotics. This will be a third one, right? So it can add up, and this is an accumulative process, and this is valid for different species that disappeared, right? Those that disappeared did not have this adaptation mechanism. They are not fast enough, so they are caught one after one until they completely disappeared. And those who have this good adaptation, they were able to run. Maybe after they run, this is one adaptation, right? Maybe after they run, they come to an area that doesn't have enough water. If they can get the water from different sources, they have this adaptation from a different source, they are adding another adaptation. So it's an accumulation process that end up having what we have right now. So according to Darwin, we talked about different observations and different conclusions. Can you tell me this, if you look at this, how does it go? Like, which one is number one? And what's number 2, 3, 4, and so on? Which one of those is number one?
What do you mean number one?
Like happened first, followed by what? Followed by what?
Natural selection.
Natural selection is later.
Overproduction.
Overproduction is one. Limited resources is two.
Heritability, and then variation.
How about competition because of the limited resources, right? So competition would be number 3. It can be variation, heritability. At the end, you get to the natural selection. Those who have the heritability and these variations, they are naturally selected, and then it gives you to the evolution. Evolution depends on the natural selection, right? So it can go like this. Fossils. What is the fossils? Fossils is basically organisms that died and fall into accumulating sediment, compressed into rocks. Some of them, few of them, okay? Like if we have hundreds of thousands or millions of those, some of them, somehow they ended up dying and surrounded by this sediment, and they ended up in the rock, and we opened it so we can find them. And this is called a fossil, and this is where they start to notice different things. Okay, like how if this was not in a fossil like this, you wouldn't see things that used to survive or survived thousands of years ago. How did you know, right? The only way to find it is if it is preserved enough within the rocks like this, and we call that the fossils. And if you ask yourself a question, how do they know? Like, I found this fossil, okay? Anybody can find it. I found this fossil and I found an organism inside of it. It looks like it's been here for 1,000 years. And then I say, no, it was here 5,000 years ago. How do you know? There is a way. They have their own way without going into the details. But just there is something called radiometric dating. Radiometric dating. Simply radiation that come from that organism that was in the fossil. If you measure it, the amount that's coming out of it, it can tell you. It goes by thousands of years. Okay? Like every 1,000 years, it's reduced like 20%. So now I see, let's say radiation, just as an example, radiation is 20% only. So it was here 5,000 years ago. Did you understand the idea? I'm just giving you as an example. It was 100% 5,000 years ago. 1,000 years later, it become 80%. 1,000 years, it become 60%, 40%, 20%. If I see it 20% now, I know that it's been there for 5,000 years. As just as an example. So simply what you need to know here is just follow the radiation that's coming out of this fossil and you can tell the age in thousands of years. And what's the relationship between the fossils and evolution? Why the fossils are evidence? Why Darwin used those fossils as an evidence? Because he collected a lot of fossils and he started to compare the same species together. Like this is related to this, related to this, related to this. So this number 10 is coming from number 1. So it goes like this. 1, 2 is more advanced than 1, more complicated. And he found a third fossil, looks like more complicated. The second one, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. If you put the all 10 beside each other, it looks actually like it's coming from number 1 and it is getting more and more and more and more advanced and more complicated. So when they found transitional forms of the same organism, this is how he proved it. So what are the characteristics that must be found in a population in order to be naturally selected? Which characteristics? It's the characteristics that enable them to suit or suited them to their environment, right? And the environment should contain the basics for that species to continue and evolve. Biogeography. What does that term means? Biogeography. Geography is geography, right? We know geography. Bio means living, bio. So we're talking about species that are distributed in a specific geographic area. Okay? Like this, marsupial mammals. These types are more in Australia. We call that biogeography. These biological organisms or these species survive in this area, which is geography. So we call that biogeography. The different distribution. What you find in this country is different than what you find there, right? Biogeography. The other thing that they used is comparative anatomy. This is another thing that they used as an evidence. So we're going through the evidence of evolution now, right? Fossils is one, biogeography is one, comparative anatomy. So like this, they're comparing the anatomy of humans versus chicken. Okay, what are the similarities and what are the differences? You can apply that on an embryo for a chimpanzee versus a gorilla versus a monkey, a regular monkey. If you compare those, you can compare the similarities and compare the anatomy, and this can be added as an evidence. If you compare bat to the porpoise, which is those who can survive in land and sea, for humans you can see some similarities, but it's getting more complicated as you go. Okay, so if you're comparing those from anatomy, it can provide another evidence. The last evidence here is, or the evidence that was added recently, is the DNA and bioinformatics as an evidence of evolution. All life use DNA for genetic coding, whatever it is. If you're talking about humans, DNA, right? Animals, DNA. Plants, DNA. Everything have DNA, right? So DNA, if you study the DNA, it can provide an additional evidence to the relationships between those. Like if you study these primates, we call those primates. Here is the monkey, gorilla, human, chimpanzee. If you compare, do a DNA analysis, this is a DNA analysis. So who is the closest to the chimpanzee? Humans. Gorilla is less. The monkey is less. Just comparing the DNA can provide you another evidence that this is according to the theory, like why the DNA is so close between this and this. Maybe this evolved from this. Okay. So when they put this information, the DNA information about the DNA in the computer and get some data, we call that the bioinformatics. Okay, you get the genetic data and compare them using the computer. We call that the bioinformatics. Okay. Okay, so this is up to 5, and we can stop here.